43-year-old Carlos from São de José, Rio Preto, Brazil, lay down for bed with his wife Maria. He knew something just wasn't right. There was an awkwardness, an elephant in the room. For starters, his wife was inviting him to sleep with her. Normally, not strange at all, but their marriage was falling apart and had been for some months now. They even recently talked about divorce, but ultimately didn't go through with it. Maria would continue to beg Carlos to sleep with her. Eventually he would give in, and just seconds later, Carlos would notice Maria didn't look so well. He also noticed a strange stench coming from her body. It was going to be a long night, and Carlos would soon find out how his wife Maria truly felt about him. Hello strangers and strangelings, welcome back to the Strange Bar and Grill. I'm serving up another true crime story time, so pull up a chair if you like strange true crime and storytelling, then this is the place to be. Have you heard the phrase, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die? I'm sure you have. Well, today's story is kind of similar to that quote, but just not quite the same exactly. Listen to the story, you'll find out why I say that. It was a little after 10 p.m. in the city of São de José, Rio Preto, and Maria and Carlos were getting ready for bed. Maria had invited her husband Carlos to sleep with her. There was some tension there, so things felt a bit awkward. Took some convincing, but Carlos obliged and would attempt to sleep with his wife. But shortly after Carlos agreed to sleep with his wife, he noticed a strange odor emanating from Maria. He noticed Maria's body temperature was just super hot to the touch. She was also just sweaty and just looked visibly ill. Carlos would voice his concern to Maria, but she just insisted, I'm fine. I'm a little tired. I had a long day, but I just want you to make love to me like you used to. Please, please, she begged Carlos. But Carlos said, no, you look absolutely terrible. There's a strange stench coming off of you. You need to go to the hospital and see a doctor immediately. Just stop arguing with me. And this back and forth went on for a few minutes until finally Maria, exhausted, clearly sick, gave in and would allow her husband Carlos to take her to the hospital. So, in the middle of the night, they gathered their things up and Carlos helped Maria into their car and they immediately rushed towards the hospital. And Maria was just getting worse and worse as each minute passed. And Carlos would hold Maria's hand to signal to her that, everything's going to be fine. We'll get to the hospital, they'll check you out, and I'm sure everything will be fine. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached the hospital. Carlos would walk Maria into the hospital and quickly fill in the staff as to, what's happening. And eventually the hospital staff were able to get her back into an examination room. The doctors and nurses would run multiple tests on her, but they just couldn't figure out what was making Maria sick. So they ended up sending some of the tests off for further evaluation. And then they would ask Maria, is there anything we should know about? Did you eat anything? Have you been exposed to anything toxic? Do you have any allergies, perhaps? And Maria would respond with a simple no to all their questions. So the doctors and nurses just stumped. So they would leave and go discuss things, and ultimately they'd come back a few moments later and they began questioning Maria again. This time they were more specific. They asked her, did you take any drugs? How's your relationship with your husband? Does he have any reason to want to do harm to you? And again, Maria would answer with a simple no. The hospital staff would leave once more and come back a few moments later, and it was at this time the hospital staff confronted Maria with their test findings. Finally, Maria broke down and confessed to the doctors and nurses as to what has been happening. So let's go back a little bit and let's try to fill in some of those blanks from earlier that night. On that dark night in January, Maria was getting ready for bed while Carlos was in the next room just hanging out watching TV. Maria was angry and frustrated with Carlos because she didn't wish to be married to him anymore. She proposed divorce many times. She produced divorce papers, but Carlos would not sign them. He would not give her a divorce. So, being frustrated with Carlos and feeling like she had no other options here, she devised a plan to get Carlos out of her life for good. While in the bathroom getting ready for bed, Maria would finish the necessary preparations to rid herself of Carlos. When she was done, she got in bed and then invited Carlos to bed. Carlos was hesitant, knowing how Maria felt, so it was weird when she invited him to bed to sleep with her. Maria would beg Carlos to be intimate with her. Again, a little strange, but after a while, he thought, hey, let's get it cracking. I'm not going to pass up this great opportunity. When opportunity comes knocking, I'm answering that door, Carlos said. Maria would ask Carlos to perform on her. Carlos granted her request, and that's when it hit him. An odd smell. He looked up at Maria, and she just looked absolutely sick. Something wasn't right. Something was really, really wrong here. Well, it turns out that odd smell that was coming from Maria was because Maria had rubbed. When confronted with this evidence at the hospital, Maria admitted to the whole thing. Maria wanted a divorce, and since Carlos wouldn't give it to her, she would poison him by rubbing an unknown toxin on and in her. She would ask him to go on her and subsequently poison him and kill him. Then she would wash up, call the emergency services, and report her husband as dead. But unfortunately for her, her plot failed because she apparently didn't realize that the poison she rubbed in and on herself would be absorbed into her body, and she actually would be poisoning herself. The hospital staff reported that she had enough poison rubbed on her to kill her and her husband. Doctors were able to save her life, and she did make a full recovery. Carlos, of course, finally signed the divorce papers and is said to have sued his ex-wife for her attempted murder plot. Now, from my sources, I could not tell if she was actually charged with anything. It doesn't sound like she was, since it was very unsuccessful. But ultimately, I guess Maria got what she wanted after all. She's getting her divorce. It's a very extreme way to do it, but I guess the task failed successfully. But kudos to the husband for convincing his wife to go to the hospital.